Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Let's go discover Patagonia, presented by NatHab's Guide Development Director and Expedition Leader, Annie Van Denther, and Expedition Leader, Daniel Hagaman. It's a pleasure to have you both with us today. Annie, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Kendall, thank you so much for your help with this. I know it takes a lot of work to set it up, so we definitely appreciate all of that effort. And thank you and hello to all of you who are signing on. Welcome. We're so happy that you're here to learn and talk about Patagonia. And Daniel, so excited to be able to work with you and learn about this incredible place. I can't wait to find out more, but first, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Kendall, and thank you, Annie, for the opportunity to present today. This is my first webinar, which I'm super excited about. I haven't had that much time to dedicate to this, but I am really excited to share this amazing spot in the world that I've spent a lot of time. So, as you can see, I look a little bit different right now than my photo here. I'm trying to embrace my inner Darwin, who spent a lot of time in Patagonia as well.
And tell us, you're coming to us from where today?
I'm coming to you from the Western Colorado, but I've spent, I was calculating this out the other day, about 30 years in Latin America. From places like Mexico. I spent my Mexico and Costa Rica, and then I spent 4 years in Bolivia, and then some time in Ecuador and Chile and Argentina.
So you are definitely the expert to share this place with us. Tell us, what was your first love? What really made you excited about Patagonia and the area that we're going to talk about today?
Well, so initially, this photo here is a picture from Bolivia when I was a Peace Corps volunteer there for 4 years. I lived there, and I really fell in love with llamas. And they're just these ornery animals that have character. And my first job coming in right off, after 3 months of training, we went up to this place in this community. And my job was to give the llamas and alpacas their yearly flea and tick bath. So we would have to wrestle these guys into a pit of water to give them their baths, and then they would dry out on the other side. And I just got up close and personal, and yes, they do spit, and yes, they do kick, but they are amazing. They can be upwards of about 200 pounds or 300 pounds. So about 300 pounds, some of the big ones. But I just fell in love with those animals.
Oh, fantastic. And I understand that, I mean, I know this about you. You really are a bit of a migratory species yourself. So you talked about some of that time in South America and you live in Colorado, but you've got something in common with this bird as well.
Yeah, so this is the Arctic tern, which we see up in Alaska. And this is a picture taken up in Alaska, but I also see these terns down in Patagonia. They migrate about 18,000 miles a year. And I felt like I was doing this for quite a few years with my family. And going from places like this here, this is after one of our Patagonia trips, we went up and visited Machu Picchu. And my son here, who is only a year and a half old, also fell in love with llamas in Machu Picchu. And there's my wife, Esther. And my son is now just turned 9.
Wow. Well, I love saying this because Esther happens to be my very best friend from college. So for me, this makes me happy. But it's great to see that this love of llamas is something that has kind of run in your family and is being picked up by Ruben. Now, let's talk a little bit about specifically this idea of Patagonia. I mean, I'm wearing this logo today. Many of us think about this brand when we think about this place. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so the brand was inspired by a group of friends that went down to this area to climb. And the logo itself is the profile of the Fitzroy Range in Argentina.
Okay, but there's quite a bit to the whole area of Patagonia, right? It's not just those rugged peaks, although that is a big part of it. Tell us about this area.
Yeah, so Patagonia, I feel like a lot of people think or have this preconception of what Patagonia is. And so what I'd like to do in this presentation is talk about some of the landscapes that we see in Patagonia and the differences in those landscapes. And then we'll get into some of the animals that we might see there. And then if we have time, some of the conservation efforts that are going on there. This is northern Patagonia on the Chilean side, which is very different than what you have in southern Patagonia, but there are a few things that are similar. You have that horse culture that we mentioned, that you saw us on horses there. So the horse culture, and it's all through Patagonia, from the northern to the southern part. And the closer you are to the border between Argentina and Chile, the more united the two cultures are. And so people still use horses to this day because it's the best way to get around in these rugged landscapes.
So I have to ask you a question. I did go to Ushuaia for a trip that I was taking to Argentina, and I don't feel like I went to Patagonia. But in your opinion, I did. Tell me a little bit about that.
So Patagonia, I feel, and I'll have some maps a little later on, but I feel Patagonia there's a lot of ideas we have of what Patagonia is. You have the sheep, the happy sheep grazing with the mountains in the background. And then you have the Argentine steaks. And we think of these huge steaks and salads. This is in Buenos Aires. And then you have more typical of what you see in the southern part of Patagonia are these roasts of lamb over the fire. And this is more of a communal event that you partake in and roast the whole lamb over coals. You might also think of Patagonia as being an excellent fishing spot. It might even be, wines in Patagonia. There's not any wines that are grapes that are grown in Patagonia, but as you get further north around the Santiago area, that's where most of the grapes are. But you still have some wines that are produced there. This is mate. Some of you have heard of mate. It's a herbal tea. I'm drinking some right now. And you drink out of a little straw here. You put a bunch of herbal tea in here, and you drink out of this filtered straw. And this is a tradition, maybe cooking over the campfire and having a little mate as a rest break after a hard work day. This is almost like the candy aisle here in the States. This is the mate aisle down in Argentina, where there's hundreds of varieties of mate available with different flavors.
I remember how many people, when I was in Ushuaia, how many people were drinking mate. And it was even so much that something we would consider really a faux pas in the States, people would hand you, like a bus driver or a taxi driver, like someone you really don't know at all, would hand you their mate to share. And for Americans, especially now with COVID, but even pre-COVID, that's like no, really, I don't need a sip of your drink. But that's a really common cultural thing there, right? To just share your mate back and forth.
Yeah, so mate is grown in the northern part of Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, and Brazil, and it's so it's grown in the more of a warmer climate, but it's sold all throughout Patagonia, and it's really pleasant, a pleasant meeting of people, and the ability to share that together.
Well, speaking of people, I recognize this guy, and maybe some of our guests also recognize this guy. I understand you've got a story about Zappa in this location.
Well, so my first trip down there guiding for natural habitat, I worked with Zappa. And one of the stories that I was told, and the first time I visited this area was in 1997. And I was down here to hike the circuit all the way around these mountains here in Torres del Paine National Park. And it was like a 13-day trek. But when I began and I left from Bolivia and I started traveling down Chile, And in the northern part of Chile, people would say, oh, you're going to Patagonia. Great. People's arms get wider to embrace you into their homes the further south you go. And so I think Sapa here is demonstrating that perfectly because he was very welcoming as well.
Wow, that's wonderful. So tell us a few of the sort of cultural details here and the location. This flag is for one of the countries. This is for Patagonia. Tell us about this.
Oh, so this is the Magellanic region in Chile. Chile is divided up into regions, and they basically are divided up east-west. And so this is the southernmost region. What you see here is the Southern Cross, which are the 5 stars. And they have guided people to this area, like Magellan and Darwin after him, through this region, because you can use this to identify the southernmost point. And as we get into, so here's the region of Patagonia. I had this up for the initial slide, but it's really the southern cone, both on the Argentine side and the Chilean side. So it doesn't include just one country, it includes both, and the Tierra del Fuego.
And it's huge.
It's huge. This is a map, an overlay of the 2 countries. We have Chile on the left and Argentina on the right. And just to give you a size, an idea of how big these countries are, basically Argentina is the size of the Great Plains extending down into Mexico. And Chile would extend from New York all the way over to Seattle or Southern California, over 2,600 miles long. But it's not very wide. It's 216 miles wide. That's basically from Chicago to Detroit.
All right. And so this line tells us where it ends in the north. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I like to use the broader definition of Patagonia, and the broader definition being on the Chilean side, the Rio Biobío, which you can see extending up from that red line. And then on the other side, the Rio Negro, which empties out in Viedma, and then all the way down to Tierra del Fuego.
Okay, now tell us why we're looking at Baja here. Explain this one to us.
Okay, so I like this map, and I'm going to try to explain it as best I can. But take a look at where the Tropic of Cancer is at the tip of Baja California, down there. And then take a look at the Tropic of Capricorn, which is on the right-hand side. We'll go for the left-hand side first. So from Baja California, you have a very dry climate down there. So what I'm doing is making a comparison with climate here. The climate in Baja is dry, desert-like, and as you move further north, you get into this Mediterranean climate, north of Los Angeles, and that Central Valley area where a lot of grapes are grown for wine. And then as you go further north into Oregon and Washington, those are areas with temperate rainforest, North America's temperate rainforest. We could do the same thing in the Southern Hemisphere. So if we take the Tropic of Capricorn and we go south from there, Tropic of Capricorn, that area is the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on the planet, where it might only receive rain every 30 years. And then as you go further south, you get into that Mediterranean climate, that same climate that Santiago and Mendoza, where they grow wine, where they grow grapes. That's that area. And as you go further south, to 40 degrees and south, you get into that temperate rainforest. So Chile and Argentina, parts of Argentina have temperate rainforest. You notice the ice fields down there, the northern and southern Patagonian ice fields.
So tell us a little bit about what's happening with the water that affects this ecosystem and this whole region.
Okay, so there really are 3 different factors that affect the climate and the weather patterns in this area in southern Patagonia. The first being the Humboldt Current, which brings water up the coast at about 40 degrees south. The Humboldt Current intersects South America. You have the westerlies, and the westerlies, I don't think you can read that here. It says westerlies, it's 46 degrees in south from there, which intersects right where the Patagonian ice fields are. And then you have the Andes Mountains. So what happens is the westerlies pick up moisture on the ocean. And when they get to the continent, they start rising. When they rise, they drop all of their moisture on the west side of the mountains. And so what you have here on the west side, and it says WE, that's supposed to say WET, wet. So those are areas that are some of the wettest areas on the planet, where you have upwards of 6,000 millimeters or almost 20 feet of precipitation that falls on the west side of the mountains there. The other
to that, living in a temperate rainforest or on the edge of one here in Homer, Alaska. So do you want me to go back to that other image, or do you want to look at this one for a minute?
No, that's fine. I can go ahead with this one. If you took a look on the eastern side of the mountains is the Patagonian steppe, which is very dry. It's in the rain shadow. And so that there's not much moisture that arrives there. So you might have 20 feet of rainfall on the western side of the mountains, and you only have 8 to 12 inches of rainfall on the eastern side of the mountains. So there's quite a difference there. We wouldn't have ice fields in Patagonia if it weren't for that moisture-laden air falling as snow up in the Andes. So this here is an image of the eco regions that we find. We're visiting basically two ecoregions, the green one and the brown one here, and you can see the Patagonian ice fields in white. And these are the green is the Magellanic subpolar forests, and the brown being the Patagonian steppe. And you can see that on the right-hand side, a satellite image looking at just the difference in the green vegetation on the left and the dry vegetation, the steppe vegetation on the right, that extends all the way out to the coast.
Wow. And so what can we expect to see in these areas in terms of vegetation? Tell us about these plants.
So we have on the left-hand side, we have the southern beach. Temperate forests here are dominated by broad-leaved evergreens, or in exchange in the northern hemisphere, they're needle-leaved evergreens like pines and spruce, but in the southern hemisphere, the forests are primarily broad-leaved evergreens. On the left-hand side is a broad-leaved evergreen, the Antarctic southern beech, and you can see the thick leaf. It invests a lot of energy in producing that leaf so it lasts, so it doesn't fall off in the wintertime. On the right-hand side, you have a linga, which is a deciduous southern beech, which actually will change color, very similar to what we have in Wisconsin or Michigan or Vermont. You have those deciduous forests, which really turn a beautiful orange and red color in the fall. And that's what we have down here with the linga.
Okay, now let's talk about the animals, because I absolutely love learning about the animals. I know we're going to talk more about the region, but I just got to take a minute with these guys because I love them. What are they called, though? The name is hard to say.
So this is a guanaco. They pronounce it differently in different places, but I guess in English it would be guanaco.
Guanaco.
But the pronunciation down there is guanaco. And this is in the Patagonian steppe. So these animals really thrive out here in that Patagonian steppe, that drier area where they have room to graze and move around.
Okay. Now, when we look at this image, we see, we learned about that steppe and we learned about the temperate rainforest, but there's a really important part here that is so very interesting, and those are those ice caps, correct?
Yeah, so one of the big portions of this trip and the really spectacular views we get of glaciers are on the southern Patagonian. There's the northern Patagonian ice field and the southern Patagonian ice field. And we're going to spend some time in that southern Patagonian ice field, which is 220 miles long. The Perito Moreno Glacier is the one that we're going to be visiting. It's right near Calafate, and it's a pretty unique place.
So when I look at this image here, I can see this is the glacier coming down. Gosh, it reminds me so much of Alaska, honestly. I feel like I could be looking at a picture of Prince William Sound or Kachemak Bay, something like that. Tell us what's going on here in this image.
So this is a place that we visit. What happens with this glacier has been fairly stable over the years and will advance and retreat every few years, and it's not that predictable how many years, but it will actually dam itself up. And one level, the arm of the lake on the left-hand side, which is more grayish in color, will actually get dammed up by the ice and rise in surface level. As that rises, then there's more pressure that builds up behind that glacial dam, and then eventually that will break through. And it's quite a spectacle to see if you're there for that moment.
I bet. And so this is a picture of the glacier itself.
Yeah, so you can see the glacier advancing. It's about 3 miles across there, across the entire glacier. There's the northern section on the right and the southern section on the left. And you can see remnants of that glacier on land on the left-hand side. That's where the last glacial dam happened. Constantly, this glacier is calving off into the water. Every once in a while, it would advance far enough and then block itself off. And we do take a boat trip. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, this looks amazing. And also, I have to say, as a kayaker or someone who has been, you know, kayaking and moving in small boats around glaciers, this must have been a really long lens, because you don't necessarily want to get this close to a glacier.
Right, yeah, this is taken with a telephoto lens from the boardwalk area, which is a pretty safe place to be. So this is the boardwalk. So after we're done with our boat trip, we actually get up on the catwalks here and are able to walk around and just really appreciate this place, this amazing bulldozing effect that the glacier has with the rock and ice that is calving off fairly close to us, with still being safe.
Right, right. You know, this boardwalk looks amazing to me. I've seen a lot of glaciers living here in Alaska and also doing some of the traveling that I've done around the world. And I don't think I can think of another place where there's this opportunity to just stand without being on a boat so incredibly close to a glacier. I love that they built this the way that they did. I think it's an amazing opportunity for our guests.
Yeah, I don't think there's very many places where you can actually get this close to a glacier, drive up to this place, and really enjoy the view.
Yeah, it's incredible. And so it looks like there's a lot of opportunity for photography. And tell us about what's going on here.
So when we're done in Argentina, we actually cross the Argentine Pampas, and we have opportunities to stop along the way, and then we go to the border. We spend a little time at the border crossing, and then we cross over into another national park, Torres del Paine, on the Chilean side. So we get to visit both Argentina and Chile. And some of the spectacular views. Yeah, you can see this is a place that we stay, Eco Camp, and this is a night shot. And we're just at a prime location. It's all about location here, and it's a beautiful setting. And we really appreciate the sustainability practices that Eco Camp has participated in. This is on the left-hand side is the Cuernos, and on the right-hand side are the towers in morning light.
Wow. Oh, I skipped one. Here we go.
It's all right. This is just spectacular. This is another view of the Cuernos, or the horns, on the left-hand side there.
It looks like such a rugged landscape.
Yeah. So if you take a look at the different color rocks there, you have granite over the top or underneath the sedimentary rock, and so you have this contrast of the two rock types. That we're not going to go into on this presentation, but we could in a later one.
As someone who's
We do.
drawing and painting, it looks like a phenomenal place to focus on that creative skill, because I think it would be amazing to just go draw these landscapes. They look absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, they are fascinating. This is one of the hikes that we end up doing out there, and we hike out to a viewpoint where there's the glacial lakes with the mountains in the background.
This light, Dan.
So we try to get up and take advantage of the day, being the weather and the wind and the lighting. And so we end up lucking out sometimes and getting some amazing early morning alpenglow. This is of the Cuernos. You can see how the glaciers, the last glacial maximum was about 18,000 years ago, and you can see those glacially carved valleys carved right out of the granite there. So the glaciers at one time were much larger than they are now and almost extended out throughout the entire Andes of Patagonia.
Wow.
Much further north than they exist today.
And so we visit more than one glacier on this trip, correct?
Yeah, so there's another glacier in Torres del Paine, which is the southernmost point on the Patagonian ice field. And it's called Great Glacier.
And tell us what's going on here, because the water looks like you've got, I don't know, 5 or 6, maybe more than that, different kinds of bodies of water here. What's going on with the differences?
Yeah, this is really interesting. You can see the towers there in the middle, the snow-capped peaks, and those are the towers. Some of the lakes that you see have different amounts of sediment in them. So you have a glacial lake over here, where Gray Glacier is the one on the left-hand side. Well, both of these. The large one on the left-hand side, you can see it's more gray in color. There's a lot of sediment or glacial till that is suspended in that lake, and it creates that color. As the sediment filters out, then you end up getting these turquoise colors. And then as more sediment settles out, you might even get the dark blue colors of the other lakes.
Now, is this a glacier that is, I mean, we can see here from these lines that it's retreating. Is it retreating at an alarming rate? Tell us about this.
This has been really noticeable, even since when I was there first year. I was there in 1997. So that was over on the right-hand side. You can see where the glacial snout or the terminus of the glacier was. And then to this day, and this is 6 years old at this point, but in 2015, the glacier had receded back to beyond halfway beyond one of the islands that's out there. So it's happening quickly on some glaciers, but then other glaciers like the Perito Moreno Glacier have maintained their integrity.
To me, that is one of the most fascinating fields of study, is why one glacier is retreating so rapidly and another is maintaining. And it's something I can take some deep dives into when I have some time, and it's really a fascinating science. But my true love is mammals and their behavior. That is absolutely what I like to learn about the most. So tell us about these animals. I think I'm going to say it right. Guanaco.
Perfect.
Yes.
So this is probably the most prolific animal that we see in Torres del Paine. And the guanaco is the wild relative of the llama. And you might hear them calling from the tops of the hills. There's a single male that would then be the dominant, the breeding male. And they would have their little harem of females that they would be breeding with at that time.
What does that call sound like?
You're gonna make me do this.
I am.
All right, so I'm not as good as some of the other guides down there, but I'm gonna try.
Okay. All right. Now, is that a dangerous thing to do? Are you gonna like have a bunch of guanacos surrounding you if you do that on a mountainside?
They definitely perk up their ears and they listen. Yeah.
So tell
Um,
us about these different species because, I got to say, to my untrained eye, I look at the guanaco and I think I'm looking at a llama or an alpaca. I really, I've not spent time looking at these animals. So teach us about the differences here.
okay, so about 6,000 years ago, people domesticated the guanaco and domesticated it into the llama. So we have the guanaco is a llama, and the vicuña, which is not found in this area, but it's found further north in the Andes in Ecuador and Bolivia and Peru. And that one has been domesticated into the alpaca about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago.
That reminds me of caribou and reindeer. The way we use that distinction, right? Where you're looking at the same species in a sense, but they've been domesticated. And so that's the biggest difference. Although it seems like this happened a lot longer ago. So do you spend time with llamas on this trip or just seeing the wild guanacos?
So there are people that still have llamas in the area, llamas and alpacas, because they are used as beasts of burden and people use their wool and they shear them. They're a little bit easier to tame than a wild guanaco. They do actually do some, so in Bolivia, we ended up using llamas as pack animals, and they can handle close to 100 pounds of weight. Yeah. So then they're carrying grains. People still use these to this day. They're much more sure-footed, but they do get a little bit ornery. It's easier to round them up because you basically can take a rope and you can put it right at neck level, and they end up they don't duck under the rope. And so you're able to round them up a lot easier than horses, for example.
Okay. Oh my goodness. These guys are just adorable. I mean, I can see why they were your first love as far as this region goes. Tell us what we're looking at here.
Well, you can see that the animals, I love their eyelashes. These are amazing. So they're very personable and gregarious animals. So we get up close and personal. This is a young one on the right and a fully grown adult on the left. So like father, like son. I need to get a photo in here of me and my son.
Yeah, I think this reminds me of you and Ruben both sort of falling in love with these animals. It's great that our guests get a chance to really get close to them. Tell us that is safe, yes?
Yeah, they're herd animals. They feel no fear next to the roads. This is right next to one of the roads. We're just pulling off and taking some pictures of the herd and just enjoying the view. Here's a young one. So they will, the young ones are called chulengos. And this is a female. So you might have the young ones and the females that would be in the herd with the dominant male. The males that are old enough to breed would then go off and form a bachelor herd.
Reminds me of sea lions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so tell us about this.
So I bring this up because I'd like to talk about some of the other animals that we might see here. The one on the left, this is the seal, the official seal for Chile. And it has two animals that we're going to be talking about and hopefully seeing in this area. One of them being the huemul, which is the Andean deer, and the one on the right being the condor.
So the huemul, am I saying that correctly?
Huemul.
Huemul. Now I see that you have this listed as a landscape species. Is this like a keystone or umbrella? I haven't really heard this term much, landscape species. Tell us what this means.
So I guess a landscape species is a species that needs, it's almost like an umbrella species where for conservation purposes, if you conserve this animal, then you're conserving many other animals in that process. But these are species that need lots of space. So they have a wide range where they might be foraging. And there's three species that we'll be talking about here. The first one being the Andean deer, which is highly endangered right now in certain areas. There's very few of them left. especially in the northern area of the Andes. There's another species called a taruca, which is a little bit smaller, totally different species, but very similar, living up in the highlands in the Atacama, above the Atacama Desert.
Okay. And so is the idea with the landscape species that you save this large area of land because that's what they need, that much land, and therefore you're saving the animal, or vice versa? You save, the only way to save the animal is to save this huge area of land. Is that right?
Yeah, which might include national parks, but it would also include even private areas that border those national parks. And I think that that's an effort that's being made in Patagonia, where you need to have landowners involved in the conservation process as well, to not take out these animals if they're threats to their domesticated animals.
Right. Okay, but sometimes like something like the puma, I imagine, could be a threat to domesticated animals. This is such a phenomenal photo. Is it really likely that our guests might see this on a trip? Tell us about that.
So the seeing puma has, especially in Torres del Paine, has really increased in recent years. So in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot more puma in this area. They're more, I think that has to do with two things. That probably has to do with changing ideas towards this animal, being that it could be an economic benefit to locals with the tourism industry, but then also the fact that the animal is, and then people see that as a way, so they don't hunt them on their private land. And so they are not eliminating them. There's also been an increase in the guanaco population in this area because they've been conserved as well. And
So
they do
tell us
prefer
about,
guanaco. Go ahead.
tell us about this. Tell us about what are we seeing here? Is this a male and a female, or?
So this is a female. So pumas tend to reproduce at any time of the year, but they primarily do it in the summer. This is a cub that, as they're just hanging out. This is a kill site that we saw guanaco that was killed near the road, and they might eat 8 to 10 pounds of that animal in one sitting, but then they would rest up and stay there in the area until they finished the carcass. And so they were just hanging out and resting. Then after this happened, they ended up taking a nap. And so we didn't really end up seeing them, but they were active. This was early in the morning. We got them just after a meal, probably.
Wow, absolutely phenomenal. I love the lighting in this particular image, and I love the way is that the young one in the back then that is kind of looking a different direction than mom lying down?
Yeah, so that would be the young one. Not a cub anymore, obviously. When they're born, they're only about a pound, and their eyes are closed. And after about 8 months or so, then they start hunting with mom. But at this point, they would probably be hunting together. They might stay with each other from 1.5 years to 3 years. They might stay with each other. This particular situation, yeah, she was licking him. This is really interesting because she was licking him and just cleaning him up, and then he ends up batting her around, and they start playing. They're really playful at this point. So it's a treat to end up seeing them in the wild. Just an idea, pumas they can be upwards of 200 pounds down here in this area, which is a very large puma. Usually they're around 150. Males are usually bigger than females. And there's been a lot of talk about puma in this region in the last few years. Here's some articles that came out recently One is the one on the left, Pumas of Patagonia, is from National Geographic. And then there's also some private tour companies. One is the Puma program of Panthera on the left-hand side, and they work with a private land holding nearby Torres del Paine National Park. And then the Patagon Journal is another resource that if you're interested in finding out more about the region of Patagonia, this is a good resource. There's another park in Chile that has also good puma viewing opportunities because it's open landscape, and that's near the town of Coyhaique.
Wow. So it seems like in the area of Patagonia, you've mentioned quite a few different efforts towards conservation, both with those landscape species, the eco lodges that you mentioned, and now the efforts that you're talking about with the puma. And I think it's really a phenomenal thing to understand about that area, that this focus on conservation is so critically important. Before we turn it over to questions, we do have to kind of do that. Do you want to run through quickly? We've got a few bird slides here, or should we leave those for another time?
How much time do we have left right now?
We want to leave enough time for questions. So if we can do it in 5 minutes, we've got enough time. You want to go?
Yeah, we can go for it.
All right, let's do it. We'll do it fast. Let's just learn about the birds of Patagonia and some of the other animals. There's a few other animals to look at here. So tell us, this is a fox, yes?
Yeah, so another carnivore that we might see down there is the red fox or coupe fox. And then Lilia mentioned this in her presentation, but this is the Darwin's rhea, or they call it down here the nyandu or the choike.
Nyandu.
Yeah, but it's a large ostrich-like bird that the males end up tending to the young, and the females lay their eggs in the male's nest, and then the females go off and mate with another male, and the males are left raising the young.
All right, so they're good fathers.
Good fathers. You can see the male on the left-hand side here, kind of in the center.
So
the larger one.
This one right here.
Yeah, and all the rest are probably young.
Okay.
Yep.
And tell us about this woodpecker.
Yeah, so this is a Magellanic woodpecker. It's a lot like the pileated woodpecker, about the same size. The male has a red head. The female has a black head with this little curl at the top, black curl at the top. They're amazing birds. This is probably one of my favorite birds to see down there.
Oh, fantastic. I was just looking at woodpeckers the other day up here on the Kenai Peninsula. They're so cool. Who's this guy? Andean flicker. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, so we have flickers, the northern flicker here in the United States, but this is the Andean flicker, very similar. Its name, Pitillo, is actually very similar to its call. It goes, Pitillo, Pitillo, Pitillo.
That sounds wonderful. And tell us about this lapwing.
So lapwings along the coastal areas or in grasslands, this is a very boisterous bird, which we might hear in the early morning hours. Along with the next bird that we have here, the banduria, or the black-faced ibis. And we'll hear these birds probably before we see them. These guys remind me of pterodactyls.
Okay. Their legs look like they could be quite strong. Now tell us about this Austral parakeet, because they're just so beautiful.
Yeah, so there's two different parakeets that we have in southern Chile. There's a narrow, or the slender-billed parakeet, and then the austral parakeet. They're very similar except for their bill shape. The austral parakeet's the one that we find here. And it's just some birds that you would think that would be found in more tropical areas, but we end up having them down here, and they're eating a lot of the hard nuts and seeds on some of the trees here.
I love this shot. I think it's so beautiful the way you can have the wings in motion, but that one that is just focused in the center there. It's an absolutely gorgeous shot, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay, and let's hear about this owl.
Well, this is a austral pygmy owl, or the chuncho, which also it's very easy to hear in at night, but in the daytime it's pretty rare. And so this is a rare sighting that we had this one come and visit us at a campsite.
I love owls so much. We get to see them sometimes in our yard here. We usually hear them more than we see them. They're like a little alarm clock, but I absolutely love them. Now tell us about this guy, the caracara.
Yeah, so the southern caracara, or the carancho, is one of the birds we might see. It's kind of a large size raptor, and would be eating small animals, lizards, shrews, voles, anything they can, and it does a lot of scavenging as well.
Okay.
I find it to be a very pretty bird. This one, the plumbeous rail, we might see near areas of water. In Argentina, this is found in Argentina, the piden.
It almost looks like an oyster catcher. I mean, it doesn't have the orange beak and all of that, but the body and the shape of the beak, it reminds me of an oyster catcher.
Yeah, this one was, there were two of them sitting next to each other, and they were doing a little dance up on top of this berberis plant, and just announcing to the females in the area that they were excited to nest up.
All right. And so, of course, this must be one of the most beautiful birds and just so interesting to watch. Their behaviors are fantastic. Tell us about the Chilean flamingo.
Yeah, so the Chilean flamingo is one of those larger birds that we might see in some of the lakes in Torres del Paine and also in the Argentine lake. They do this funny thing where you see them here. The ones on the right, the three on the right, are moving their legs around and stirring up the bottom contents, because what they are filter feeders, and they're eating the crustaceans and anything else they might find under the sediment layers there. So they stir up the sediment and then they filter out what's good to eat with their tongue and their bill.
Wow. And of course, that's why they turn pink, right?
And that's why they turn pink, right? This is one of my favorite birds, even though it's one of those small little brown jobby birds that, but I like this one. And this picture, this is a rufous collared sparrow. It's a very unique call, so you can identify them. But, and this one has eaten all of the berberis, the calafate berries that are on this plant. And so I can't show you those, but they say that if you eat the berberis, which is also called the Patagonian blueberry, you will always come back to Patagonia.
I presume you have eaten some of this?
Many of these. They stain your teeth and your mouth and lips.
Okay. So now there are these conservation efforts. Tell us about this.
So one of the things that I was really impressed with when I went down to Patagonia initially are the efforts on conservation. This is a biodegradable bag that we use over on the Argentine side, and then there's another bag here on the left that is used at EcoCamp. They're both, plastics have been a huge issue in Patagonia because of the high winds and the open landscapes. And so in 2001, I believe, Calafate was one of those towns that impressed everyone, saying, we're going to go ahead and ban plastic bags, single-use plastic bags in grocery stores, way before anyone else was even thinking about that. And then later on in Buenos Aires, they banned plastic bags. And then in 2018, I believe, in Chile, they banned plastic bags, single-use plastics, from the entire country.
Wow.
So I feel like these efforts are really helping in this area reduce the amount of trash that is visible. And I feel like it's something to look at Patagonia as an example of what to do. And I feel like they're doing an amazing job. There's more to be done, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. And even the places that we stay when we're down there are focused on sustainability.
Yeah, so the eco camp that we stay at has been trying to reduce their carbon footprint by using solar panels. They have a hydropower plant. They do composting as well as composting toilets. They try to use local decorations and local products from people living in the area. So they've really set a high standard for that, I guess, that type of place. This is a place in Argentina. This is a bamboo bike, an e-bike made out of bamboo.
Wow.
So, which is pretty cool, and it's a unique way. There's a guy that has started this up, and I feel like they're doing a great job just getting the word out there that, hey, we need to change some of these practices and be more sustainable in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And so tell us about this.
These are just some resources. There's some books here, and I mentioned the Patagonia Journal before, which is associated with the Tompkins Foundation. And they've done some conservation efforts in both Argentina and Chile. You have, if you're interested in learning more about the birds of Chile, there's a couple different books out there, as well as a wildlife guide to Chile. And then if you're wanting to learn more about cougars and pumas, there's a few books that have come out recently by Jim Williams and Mark Elbrick. And I think these were mentioned in one of the other webinars as well.
Right. So overall, Dan, I think you've convinced me I need to go to Patagonia again. I went to a small part of it, but it seems to me that there's so much more that I need to go explore. And I hope that today we've shared some information with our guests so that they can also get excited about this place and hopefully someday be able to be on one of your trips or Zappa's trips or Helder's trips. So I think at this point, if you're ready, we will open it up to questions. So Kendall, do you have some questions for us?
I do indeed. Thank you very much. And I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you have a question you'd like to submit today, you can do that in your control panel under the questions field. And I know we're at the top of the hour, so for those watching, if you need to head out today, just know that we did record the presentation and we'll have the replay available later tonight. Okay, I'm going to ask you a few trip questions that came in, just in case people need to head out. What's the highest altitude you visit on this trip?
Well, the peaks in the area are, the towers there are 8,000 feet, but we are much lower than that. So the highest altitude, I'm gonna say a couple, 2,000 feet about would be maximum.
Okay, great. And there are a few questions about the hikes. People are just wanting to know how long and difficult is the average daily hike, and if someone wants to do a longer or more difficult hike, is that possible?
So we do have two guides. We're required to work with a local guide in at EcoCamp, which allows us to be flexible. And so doing two different hikes is a possibility. We try to keep the group together as much as possible. In many cases, it might be a mile, or I think one of the longest hikes that we do is about 3.5 miles. But we always weigh those options. So if people are wanting to do something a little more mellow one day, there's some flexibility and we can figure something out.
That is definitely one of the best things about having two guides, local guides, ops staff. We really do put a lot of staff on those trips, and it makes it so we can just be, you know, really flexible and provide each guest with the experience that they're looking for.
Absolutely, yeah. When I was down there, I had the ability to split off and do a longer, more difficult hike as well with the local guide. So we really are able to tailor it a lot. Thank you. Okay, next question. What time of year does this trip run, and what's the best season to go?
That's always the question, huh? I enjoy the entire season is amazing. I mean, in the spring, which is December, we start up in December and we have a trip that runs in December. That's a nice time in the fact that it's a little less busy, but it might be a little colder at that time of year. You might get some adverse weather, but you do start having wildflowers coming in kind of January, and then the tourism season picks up in January. So we have more people at that time. And the season down here in Torres has gotten larger and larger every year. But for natural habitat, we run January, February, and March. And I think we're doing one trip in April, which we might end up seeing the fall colors in April if you end up going on one of those later trips, which is like their fall.
Mm-hmm. So if someone's a serious photographer, are there good opportunities for, sunrise or sunset photography, for example?
Yes, definitely. This is the place we can get up. We have control of the time that we leave camp, and we can be driving when it's still dark out and get set up in a location before sunrise hits. And that's one of the goals of this trip, is to get those spectacular alpenglow shots.
Mm-hmm. Now, if someone has dietary restrictions, if they're gluten-free or vegan, are you able to accommodate this?
I can speak gluten-free one. I am gluten-free, guys, and I have been able to eat on every single one of Natural Habitat's trips. As the representative gluten-free person, I have worked really hard to make sure that that is always a possibility. So that's just our trips in general, and I'm going to let Dan speak to the specifics on Patagonia.
No, I think there's always options out there, and we work with some amazing people at Eco Camp and over in Argentina, so there are always gluten-free options, yeah, or vegetarian
Wonderful.
options. If you don't want to have a giant Patagonian steak, there are other options for that.
Wonderful. All right, I'm going to move on to other questions about wildlife and the landscape. So first one is, how do guanacos compare with llamas or alpacas? Can you tell us a little bit of the differences between them, say in size or appearance?
So both the wild relatives, the llama or the guanacos and the vicuñas, are slightly smaller than the domesticated animals, the llamas and alpacas. Llamas tend to be, they're much larger. They can be upwards of 300 pounds. Alpacas are more like 150 pounds max, 160 pounds possibly. Alpaca fur is highly prized. All of them are used for textiles in the region, so they shear them and will use them for textiles. What's interesting is the vicuña textile. They do actually have a rounding up of wild vicuña in Bolivia that is still legal to this day, even though they've been hunted to almost extinction. They've recovered in number, and the community ends up rounding them up and shearing them and selling that wool, and that wool sells for about $300 a pound. That's very expensive. A sweater might cost you $2,000.
That's like Kiviat.
That's like Kiviat. We can make some comparisons with Alaska.
Yeah, that's like Kiviat. So, because with Kiviat, right, they have to go and pick the fur off of the bushes. So it's not a domesticated animal at that case. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Wow. All right, pumas. Do pumas only have one cub at a time, and how long are the cubs with their mothers?
So they might stay with their mothers for a year and a half, or possibly a little longer. The litter size. So it's usually 1 or 2, but they can be upwards of 4.
Wow.
So there has been cases. I think there was a case a few years ago. I saw some pictures of a puma with 3 young. But primarily, I've seen ones with 1 and 2 cubs.
All right. There's a couple questions here about trees. What are other common broadleaf evergreen trees besides the beech that one could find here?
So as for broadleaf evergreen, you're not really, this is primarily dominated by the southern beech trees. So you're going to have both deciduous and broadleafed evergreen trees in this area. It's pretty much, you have some smaller shrubs that you will have in the area that might keep their leaves year round. but those are really the two. As you go further north into Chile, you have 7 different species of beech trees. But in this area, it's just those, well, those 3, 2 deciduous and 1 evergreen.
Okay, great. All right, well, I'm going to call it there with questions. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to present today. I know you brought back a lot of memories for me and other people watching today of our time in Patagonia, so thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back over to you for closing comments, and we'll start with Daniel.
Well, I thank you for visiting Patagonia with me. I appreciate the opportunity. And I would love to see you on one of these trips, and I look forward to getting back down there because I haven't been down there in now just over a year. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for joining me on this Let's Go journey today. I cannot wait to go. I always feel like Patagonia is similar to where I live, where it's the mountains that meet the sea. And I know my son has a dream to surf there. So now I have so many reasons to go to the area. And thank you, Kendall, for your help today. But most of all, thank you to all of you who tuned in to watch. We absolutely love the fact that so many people want to learn about our incredible planet and the places that we love to go visit. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week. But don't forget, there's also one tomorrow.
Thank you so much again, you two, and ditto to everything Annie just said. Do join us tomorrow. You can find the link to register on our website. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Bye, everybody.
Bye.